Okay, I think we can begin our class today. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, teacher.
So, as you can see on the computer screen, today we'll be discussing about dominant Buddhist schools, the major Buddhist schools that survived. We have been discussing about different Buddhist schools last week, right? Especially during the time of Asoka. So there are different numbers mentioned in different sources of these schools, but all these schools came to exist, primarily from these two main schools, Mahasangika and Theravada, right? But there are several schools that survived and that became dominant school in different parts of India. And from the 3rd century, it is said to be, a kind of Abhidharma movement that began. Okay, so and it continued for several 100 years. So many different, Abhidharma literature developed. Okay, but as far as we know now, that only the complete Abhidharma literature of the Sarvastivada school and of the Theravada school that are really surviving now. Okay, so what about the Abhidharma teachings of other schools? We do not have so many records. And of course, later on in the Mahayana tradition, especially when you look into Yogacara system, you have a different explanation of the teachings, and which are considered to be, Abhidharma teachings as well. So, and then we'll be covering this account of 4th Buddhist Council as well. Okay, so among the major schools, when we talk about the important schools or primary schools that survived, these are 4. Vibhajyavada, also known as Theravada, and Sarvastivada, and Sammitya, also known as Puggalavada, and Mahasangika. So 3 of them belonging to Sthaviravada, and the other is Mahasangika, right? Now, when we talk about Sthaviravada, which later became known as Vibhajyavada or Theravada, and as you have just seen, Sarvastivada also belongs to this group, Sthaviravada, right? So this Vibhajyavada is considered to be the most orthodox school. Buddha is looked at as a perfect human being with so many superhuman qualities. So if you look at the Theravada suttas, what does it mean by focus mode? Make it big. You want to? Okay. Okay, so if you look at the early text in the Theravada tradition, you'd find how the Buddha is described, right? A perfect human being, Uttama Purisa, right? and of course with so many superhuman qualities, in the sense that, for example, after his awakening, when he was met with this Brahmin who asked him, you look calm and serene, what are you? Are you a Brahmin? Are you a Deva? Are you a human being? In that, case, the Buddha said that I'm not a human being, not a Deva, not a God, and he said that I should be known as Buddha, right? Because even though he is a human being, he has, overcome all the limitations of a common human being. So he went beyond all these ideas of, human, Deva, Brahma. He achieved the state of Buddhahood. Therefore, he said, I should be called Buddha, the enlightened one, the awakened one, right? So that was the idea that we find in the Theravada tradition. And we find this complete, story of Siddhartha and how he renounced home life, how he wanted to become a Buddha. And then after attaining Buddha, he, provided his teachings. And as a human being, of course, he has to, take food, and then he has to take rest. He was having some, physical weaknesses, difficulties later on. So that is how Buddha is, understood in the Theravada tradition. Sometimes regarded as Devati Deva, but Chatuma Sutta, for example, states that Buddha was impatient with some monks as they were making so much noise. He scolded them, saying, "Fishermen in fish market." So this is another occasion where we find that at one point in time, there are different monks that came together and they were having their conversations, and Buddha heard the noise, and then he went to see why this noise is going on, and then he scolded them, saying that it is like fishermen in the fish market. And in fact, he said to the monks that when you gather together, either you engage in Dhamma discussion, or you keep silent and continue with your own practice, right? So this impatientness was also there. That is what is noted here. Also, he is subject to human weakness, as he was 8 years of age and time to time having pain on his back. So he would say that I'm having back pain. So time to time when he was providing teaching to the students, sometimes if he has this back pain, he would ask some senior monks to continue the teaching, right? So, yes.
Can I ask a question? I want to know Savyavara became Theravada, or Theravada is one of the king and Savyavara?
Stavira is a Sanskrit term for Thera, right? So Staviravada means Theravada in a way, right? But if you take Staviravada as a big camp, there are so many different schools that came out of this Staviravada. Vivajjavada was one of them, which is equated with Staviravada, and the Pali counterpart of Stavira is Thera. So it is called Theravada, right? So in a way you can say that as a Vibhajjavada, it was a school that came up from Staviravada, but when it got this name Theravada, it became in a way synonymous with Staviravada.
Thank you.
Right? So Staviravada in a way representing, Theravada is representing Staviravada. But we also have to keep in mind that Sarvastivada also is a school that arose from, Staviravada, and that survived in the, northern part of India.
Thank you, teacher. Thank you.
Yes. So, yeah, so that was the situation. So sometimes he would ask his disciples to continue the teaching. Now, if you talk about the, important teachings that are present in this school, the teaching upheld by this school is simple and straightforward. For example, this very famous, stanza that you would find in different places in the canonical text, especially in the Dhammapada: restraining from all evil, cultivating good, purifying one's mind, right? Sabba papasa karanam kusalasa upasampada sachitta pariyodapana. So this is a very direct, and straightforward teaching. And this is what you can find throughout so many discourses, right? In the sense of kusala, akusala, what is kusala, what is akusala, and then what are the roots of kusala, what are the roots of akusala, and how you can really overcome them and purify your mind and progress in your spiritual journey. This three training is one of the most famous teaching that you can find in the Theravada tradition. That is Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, right? The path of practice presented in terms of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. Now, these are regarded as three trainings, but if you look at so many different suttas, you would find there are different steps in the spiritual practice. If you look at the Samaya Pala Sutta, for example, I think in the canonical, text, Nikaya literature, Samaya Pala Sutta provides the longest list of, path factors that one should, follow in his spiritual journey. And then if you look at the Satipatthana Sutta or Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the path of practice is presented in terms of four main steps: Kaya Anupassana, Vedana Anupassana, Chitta Anupassana, and Dhamma Anupassana, right? So Sila refers to 5 precepts or 8 precepts or 10 precepts, including 10 Kammapathas. And Samadhi is to be obtained by means of 40 meditation objects. You would find a description of 40 Kamatanas, meditation objects, in the Visuddhimagga, Samadhi section. Especially it refers to the attainment of Apanna Samadhi and Upachara Samadhi. So 2 types of Samadhis are mentioned. Apanna Samadhi refers to a deeper concentration, in the jhanic states, whereas Upachara Samadhi is said to be, the preliminary, states of concentration that is required, for the progress of one's practice in any kind of meditation. Okay, it could be samatha, it could be vipassana. Samadhi generally means one-pointedness of the mind, which is absolutely necessary for the development of wisdom. Wisdom, apanya, refers to having a thorough understanding of the 4 noble truths and the theory of dependent origination and the functioning of kamma and vipaka in the samsara. Their understanding refers to having an insight into the 5 aggregates, 12 ayatanas, and 18 dhatus as anicca, dukkha, and anatta. If you look closely here, you'd find primarily, 2 approaches wisdom. One is to have a general understanding of Four Noble Truth, theory of dependent origination, functioning of karma and vipaka in the samsara. The other refers to having insight into your own existence and looking at your own existence in terms of anicca, dukkha, and anatta. It is apanna, right? Apanna and upachara. Let me check. Apanna, yeah, should be apanna. It's a misspelling. Apanna and upachara. Yeah. So at the third council, these teachings were authenticated as representing the Vibhajyavada school. So what we know from the third council is that in the third council, especially this Theravada canon, Vibhajyavada canon, was complete with the completion of Kathavattupakarana by Mugaliputta Tissathera. So that is how it is recorded. Two important texts that came about much later represent central philosophy of this school. So if you, apart from going through all these canonical texts and so on, if you want to have a deeper understanding of the Theravada tradition, these are the two books that you can look into, you can study thoroughly. One is Visuddhimagga of Buddhaghosa in 5th century Common Era, and the other is Abhidhamma Sangaha of Anuruddha, that is composed around 10th or 11th century CE. The Abhidhamma Sangaha represents a summary of the Abhidhamma Pitaka, where the reality of existence is discussed in terms of four ultimate categories: Rupa, Chitta, Chaitasika, and Nibbana. So Abhidhamma Sangaha could be understood as a kind of summary presentation of this entire Abhidhamma Pitaka. And the Visuddhimagga is considered as general commentary to the entire Tipitaka. So in the Visuddhimagga, Acharya Buddhaghosa has presented a systematic, provided a systematic presentation of the teachings from all these different texts in the canon in terms of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. Also, there is another, framework that was followed in his presentation is the 7 Visuddhi. What is the ideal goal mentioned in this text? It is the attainment of arahanthood, right? So the attainment of arahanthood is said to be the ideal goal in Theravada tradition, but it also talks about, the idea of Samma Sambuddha and also the idea of Pacceka Buddha, right? But the emphasis is given on this attainment of arahanthood. The reasoning provided is that for becoming a Buddha or Pacceka Buddha, it may take longer period of time, right? And the journey could be much more difficult. Whereas if you take up the path to become an arahant, it could be easier compared to the other two paths. Yeah, so very briefly, that was the discussion with regard to the Vibhajyavada school. I will come to the Abhidhamma discussion later on of these two schools, especially the Theravada and also the Sarvastivada. Now, Sarvastivada, on the contrary, adopted Sanskrit as their literary medium. They come closest to the Sthaviravadins, one of the most popular schools in India, especially in the Punjab and the northwest frontier provinces now in Pakistan. Among the exponents of this school were Vasumitra, who played important role in the organization of the Fourth Council in Kashmir under the patronage of King Kanishka in the 1st century CE, and much later, great scholars like Vasubandhu popularized the teaching of Sarvastivada school. Among the significant teachings of this school is the idea of Sarvamasti, all exist, that defines the school. They also accepted the idea of retrogression of Arahants. They denied, like other Stavira schools, the transcendent powers ascribed to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. While denying any permanent substance in an individual, they admitted the reality of all things and explained in terms of dharmas, real existence. Unlike the Theravadins, they accepted three asamskritas: Akasha, Pratisankhya Nirodha, and Apratisankhya Nirodha. In the Theravada tradition, you have just one asamskrita, right? Nibbana. All the others are samskrita. So as you can see, there are some similarities as far as these ideas of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas are concerned. But in the case of Sarvastivada, they also accepted this idea of retrogression of Arahants. And one of their significant theory is Sarvam Asti. We'll be discussing that very soon. Samitya was another school, also from Sthaviravada. They held a distinctive theory concerning the Puggala, or person. They believed that though an individual does not exist independently from the 5 skandhas or components that make up his personality, he is at the same time something greater than the mere sum of his parts. The Samitya were severely criticized by other Buddhists who considered the theory close to the rejected theory of Atman, the supreme universal self. The school apparently had popular support, for the Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang described it in the 7th century as one of the 4 main Buddhist sects of that time. So it survived for a long period of time, even though it was having this idea of Pudgala, person, which was criticized by other Buddhist schools, right? So they did not use the term Atman, as it was rejected in all other Buddhist schools, and instead they used the term Pudgala. They also have accepted that these 5 aggregates, a being is consists of 5 aggregates and they are ever changing, but they have accepted the idea that there is a Puggala there that, that is, that continues to exist, that survives. So that is why they were heavily criticized by other schools. And the 4th school is Mahasangika. It was one of the earliest schools and considered as a forerunner of the Mahayana tradition. Since the beginning, they have revolutionized the Sangha with their inclusiveness in approach and different interpretations of the Dhamma and Vinaya. They have included in their canon a good number of sutras and texts that are considered as later development, but representing the words of the Buddha. While they have accepted the Dhamma and Vinaya to represent authentic teachings of the Buddha, they have not, however, accepted a certain text, namely Parivara, Abhidharma, Padisambhida, Niddesa, and a section of Jataka, the reason being the text not representing the words of the Buddha. So while on the one hand, we see that, a number of sutras and texts were composed in this tradition, right? And that are regarded as Buddha Vachana, representing the teachings of the Buddha. On the other hand, when they are forming their own canons, they have rejected, a certain text from other tradition like Parivara, Abhidharma, and so on, saying that they do not really represent the works of the Buddha, right? So I'm not sure, probably, it could be that when they were really forming or coming to this idea of text, some of these texts were not really ready at that time, and they were not really fully accepted by many others. Probably they developed later. And we know that some of these texts belonging to Khuddaka Nikaya, came to be completed later, right? According to Master Wenchang, I think this is Master Wenchang, the Mahasangika had their own complete canon that include 5 primary sections: Sutra, Vinaya, Abhidharma, Dharanis, and miscellaneous section. As Bapat, for example, points out that these were the 5 sections. The Vinaya of the Mahasangika, according to Wenchang, was the same as that compiled at Mahakassapa's council. So they have accepted the Vinaya that was discussed in the first council, which is in a way, simpler and shorter compared to the 5 volumes that we have now in the Theravada tradition. He writes that he studied the treatise of the Abhidharma with 2 monks at Dhanakataka in the south. He carried 657 Sanskrit works from India back to China and translated them into Chinese under the orders of the emperor. Among them were 15 Mahasangika works on the Sutra, the Vinaya, and the Abhidharma. So it seems that this text, have a great influence in the, formation and establishment of Mahayana movement later. Still earlier, Fahian had taken away a complete transcript of the Vinaya of the Mahasangikas from Pataliputra to render into Chinese. So these are some of their important ideas. The 5 Vijnanas, referring to sense perceptions: Chakku Vijnana, Sota Vijnana, Ghana Vijnana, Jiva Vijnana, and what is the other one? That is 6th one. 5th.
Kaya Vijnana.
Yeah.
Ghana.
So that is perception of body.
Kaya Vijnana.
Kaya and
Vijnana.
or Futtabba is another word used. Conduce both to Saraga, attachment to worldly matters, and Viraga, non-attachment to the same state. So it is the same 5 Vijnanas that conduce to Saraga and Viraga, attachment and non-attachment. The Rupendriyas, organ of sense, are mere flesh. They themselves cannot perceive the Vijnanas of the organs. Okay, so these 5 are Rupendriyas, not Manindriya. So Rupendriyas are flesh, right? They themselves cannot perceive the Vijnanas of organs. One can eliminate suffering and obtain the highest bliss through knowledge. It seems like they are particularly focusing on prajna, right? As Srotapanna, one who has entered the path of sanctification is liable to retrogress, while an Arhat is not. So they have a particular understanding of an Arahant who does not retrogress, but it seems like here the mentioning is made of Srotapanna, There are, of course, other stages of sainthood. I'm not sure, probably, and they have similar ideas with regard to the other stages as well. But the term Srotapanna means one who has already entered the path. According to the Theravada tradition, once you become a Srotapanna, there is no way that you are coming back to the, Putujana state, right? It takes maximum, I think, 7 lifetimes to completely free from samsara. He is capable of knowing his own nature, swabhava, through his chitta and chaitasika dharmas. He is also liable to commit all kinds of offenses except the 5 heinous crimes. Panchanantaryani, namely matricide, patricide, the murder of an arahat, shedding the blood of the Buddha, and creating a split in the Sangha. So he is liable to commit all kinds of offenses except these 5, anantariyakam. Nothing is indeterminate. So according to this tradition, they don't say that nothing is abhyakrita. They are either good or bad, either kusala or akusala. The original nature of the mind is pure. It becomes contaminated when it is stained by upaklesha, patience, and agantuka rajas, adventitious defilements. The original nature of mind is pure. So there are some texts, for example, the Uttara Tantra Shastra, and they talk about, this text talk about how the mind can be understood as pure originally, and how it becomes affected by all these kinds of upakleshas and adventitious, defilements and so on. So many examples are given. For example, when you first find a diamond or gold, they are mixed with mud and so many things, right? So the original nature of the diamond is, bright, but you have to, remove all the dust first. Okay, then only you can see it shining. Similarly, the original nature of mind is said to be pure and clear, but it is covered with so many upakleshas and defilements. You have to follow different approaches to be able to remove all these defilements and negative forces so that it can shine. In this map, you can find important places where different schools survived and became popular. This is according to the record of Master Shenzhen. Red representing Theravada school. So it says that, for example, in the beginning, we know that especially all the first 3 councils have been taking place in this area, right? Pataliputra, Rajagaha, right? Later on, when there have been so many different schools, in the time of Asoka, he sent missionary groups to different parts of India and outside India. And as he was ruling the entire country, he established this Dhamma Mantha, right? The ministers to take care of religious affairs. And he established 84,000 stupas all around the country. Buddhism got spread in the entire country. So Sarvastivada, for Sarvastivada, it says, Mathura is considered to be one of the places where it was very, very strong in the beginning, later on moved to further north. So this whole area representing the place for Sarvastivada school. Sarvastivada school was quite strong in this part. Orange representing Vibhajyavada school. So that is Theravada and Vibhajyavada in this part. Southern India and Sri Lanka. There are some connections probably. Yeah, Vajrayana came much later actually. Much later. That is 6th, 7th century. Common era. Yellow representing Mahasangika centers. So these are the places where Mahasangikas having their centers. Green representing Samitya or Puggalavada, Vallabhi, close to Ujjain, and gray representing Dharma. This part. There could be some influence, of course. Mahasangika, yeah. So Mahasangika schools were, popular in these areas, and their teachings are said to be, contributing to the development of Mahayana tradition. Sarvastivada had their own canon, and they focused mainly on Abhidharma, theories. They came up with their own Abhidharma text. That is how they tried to understand and explain the teachings of the Buddha. In the southern Thailand and Sri Lanka, they had their own Abhidharma. So basically, in the 3rd century BC and subsequently, it can be considered as a period of Abhidharma. Okay. Now, when we talk about different Sangitis and a split of Sangha into different schools, among the two causes, Dhamma and Vinaya, different perspectives on Dhamma and Vinaya. In the beginning, it was mainly Vinaya matters, whereas later on, it became a matter of Dharma, how one can understand and interpret Dhamma. Okay.
Teacher, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I have a doubt. Maybe you can clarify. When we think a tradition, we can say that it's based on the Vinaya and Abhidharma, or we can speak also about a vehicle in terms of their practice. But my question is, isn't it that the practice depends upon the Abhidharma that certain practitioners uphold? Because Abhidharma is the view, the perception of all the dharmas also.
Yeah. So I did not really get your question.
My question is, certain practice, it will depend upon the Abhidharma that a practitioner upholds or not?
Of course, why not? It depends on the person's, understanding of Abhidharma. Now, if you talk about Abhidharma, if you look at the origin of Abhidharma, I think there is twofold things that function in the origination of Abhidharma. Firstly, it represents the intellectual side of these masters, right? And the other is their practice. So these masters are highly, established in their practice. They wanted to convey their experience of their practice in words. We can find in the early text, the teachings are provided in a very, very simple way, right? Whereas what they have been experiencing, what is actually happening, what kind of understanding you have once you progress in the path, it is all mentioned in the Abhidharma. You see or you understand things in terms of dharmas, right? So, of course, a particular person upholding a particular Abhidharma view carries out his practice having that view in the mind.
Okay.
And this Abhidharma text, as far as, of course, I'm not an expert in the Abhidharma literature and also the teachings of all these different schools. But as far as my knowledge is concerned, related to Theravada Abhidhamma, a certain texts are composed to test the knowledge of a practitioner.
Really? Can you expand a little bit about that?
Yes. For example, first few texts. Yes, that is right. There are differences in all these three categories of text, Abhidharma, Sutta, and Vinaya. The principal rules are same. That is true. And there are differences in all levels. The principal rules and principal teachings are true. I mean, they are common to all Buddhist schools, So there are a number of rules, Vinaya rules, could be secondary rules that are different. And of course, when you look at the collection of suttas as well, like in the Pali tradition, they are called Nikaya, whereas in the Chinese tradition, they are called Agama. And nowadays, different people, different scholars have been studying this text, doing a kind of comparative studies. For example, there was a Vietnamese monk, I think he's a monk, who did some comparative studies of suttas and agamas. Later on, now we find Bhikkhu Analayu has been doing it, and there are some other scholars. Yeah, so we are talking about a certain text composed, to test the spiritual advancement of practitioners. You can find in the Theravada literature. For example, if you look at the first few texts, they are of course providing the description of dhammas in different ways, right? In terms of rupa, citta, cetasika, and also kusala, akusala, and in terms of loka, kamma, vachara, rupa vachara, arupa vachara, and so on, sankata and asankata. Later on, you would find, which is the text? You have the 7 text, right? Dhamma Sangani, Vibhanga, Dhatu Kata, Ugalapayate, Katavatto, Yamaka, Patthana, right? In the Yamaka, particularly I think in the Yamaka, and first 3 represent explanations. Ugalapayate is a different type of text. I think especially in the Yamaka, you would find that, teachings are provided in a different way. In fact, part of this text, you can find earlier text also in the Dhatu Kata as well. Whereas where you would find a lot of questions are asked and answers provided. Now, somebody who is established, in the practice, who is a master, who is guiding his students, would be able to check his students' understanding and attainment by asking these questions. Now, these questions are very, very complex in a way. Because, for example, when you talk about 5 aggregates, 12 ayatanas, 18 dhatus, and then you ask, in how many of this rupa is present, in how many of this, chetana is present, in how many of this, it is associated with lobha or dvesha, or so you have all these kinds of questions. And one who is established in the practice would be able to immediately, answer. So that is why it is said that some of this text or sections of this text are, designed in a way to test the understanding of a practitioner.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so these are the schools. Now more on Theravada and Sarvastivada. So we know that Sarvastivada was most powerful and influential school in the northwestern India until around 7th century CE. It was influential, particularly in Kashmir and Central Asia. So according to their record, Mahasangika was a monk, who was sent as a missionary monk to these places, Gandhara area, and who was responsible for spreading, Buddhism in this area. It was first established in Mathura, that is what is mentioned by certain source, and a monk called Upagutta was responsible for establishing this school in Mathura. And under the patronage of King Kanishka, it flourished throughout Northwest India, North India, and Central Asia. They had their own canon, but they were mostly known for their Abhidharma views and treatises. So one of their earliest texts were Ashtagrantha, right? So it was called Ashtagrantha because it was having 8 chapters. It was a Abhidharma text. It could be considered as one of the, first text produced by the tradition. It was composed by a certain monk called Katyayaniputra. Later, it came to be known as Jnana Prasthana. So Jnana Prasthana is one of the 7 Abhidharma texts in Sarvastivada school. So just as the Theravada tradition, they had 7 Abhidharma texts. The remaining 6 are said to be developed from the first one. Okay, so the first one, that is Jnana Prasthana, is said to be the foundational text. So later, when the 4th council occurred in Kashmir, a Mahavibhasha or great commentary, it was also designated as a Buddha Bhashita Abhidharma that was composed on this Ashtagrantha or Jnana Prasthana. And it was about 100,000 verses. And it completely defines the Sarvastivada standpoint. Not everyone belonging to the school accepted this Mahavibhasha. So many of them belonging to Sarvastivada school did not agree to this Mahavibhasha. The so-called Western masters did not accept it to be representing the words of the Buddha, and thus there came to be 2 groups. One is called Vaibhashika because they have been following this Mahavibhasha closely, and the other is non-Vaibhashika because they are not following this Mahavibhasha. They do not accept it as, authentic text. Different interpretations of Abhidharma points led to hold the 4th council. Now, for example, when you look at the description of 4th council and Kanishka's involvement, it says there is a story that says that at one point in time, Kanishka was very much interested in understanding the teaching of the Buddha. So he would invite different monks from different centers to have Dhamma discussion, and he was having different explanations of the Dharma. And then he invited a certain monks, discussed with them what could be the reason, and later on, together with these monks, he decided to organize this 4th council to decide, the teachings of the Buddha, because he was having different interpretations of Dharma, provided by different masters. Kanishka was regarded as the greatest king of the Kushan dynasty that ruled over the northern part of the Indian subcontinent, Afghanistan, and possibly areas of Central Asia, north of Kashmir region. He is, however, chiefly remembered as a great patron of Buddhism. 500 monks were gathered led by Vasumitra to create a Buddha Bhashita Abhidharma. The Mahavibhasha, the commentary to the Jnana Prasthana, was composed not in Prakrit but in Sanskrit. They split into Vaibhashika and non-Vaibhashika took place. So Vaibhashikas are regarded as Sarvastivadins, whereas non-Vaibhashikas are called Sautrantikas, or sometimes Mula Sarvastivadins. Now they are called Sautrantikas because they were more inclined to sutras rather than Abhidharmas. Yes, so main teaching, dharmas exist in 3 periods of time, past, present, and future. In its support, Vasubandhu, a 4th century Buddhist scholar, composed Abhidharma Kosha, on which he again wrote a commentary, Abhidharma Kosha Bhashya, against Sautrantika criticism. Yeah, so Sarvastivada was popular in the Northwest India and Central Asia, whereas Vibhajyavada or Theravada was popular in South India and Ceylon. Now, Theravada sources disregard the council at Kashmir. So in the Theravada tradition, we find an account of a 4th council that took place in Sri Lanka. Okay, so this 4th council that took place in Kashmir is not counted in the Theravada tradition. So they had their own 4th council in the time of King Vattagamini Abhaya. By the end of 1st century BCE, 500 learned monks participated in Aluvihara or Aloka Vihara in Matale. At the end of this council, the Tipitaka was written down, commentaries were revised, recast, and rearranged subject-wise. So this is the place in Sri Lanka where this council took place. Now, those upholding Sarvastivada Abhidharma and believing in this idea of all exist say that those who hold all exist, the past, the present, and the future belong to the Sarvastivada. Those, on the other hand, who hold that some exist, namely the present and the past karma that has not given fruit, but not those that have given fruit or the future, are followers of the Vibhajyavada. So it seems like it is only this particular school, Sarvastivada, that believe in this idea of all exist, and other schools, including Theravada, Sautrantika, they had criticisms. Today, I will be discussing the idea of all exist, Sarvastitva by Sarvastivadins. Some of the Sarvastivadins, you can look at Professor Dhamajyoti's text for a fuller description, Sarvastivada Abhidharma. I will also be pointing out some of the criticisms, especially the standpoint of Theravada Abhidharma, where the Theravadin masters providing their own understanding of Dharma and criticizing the idea of all exist of Sarvastivada. These are the 7 texts: Dharma Skanda Shastra, Sangiti Pariyaya Shastra, Prajnapti Shastra, Vijnana Kaya Shastra, Jnana Prasthana Shastra, Prakarana Pada Shastra, Dhatukaya Shastra. So this is from Professor Dhamajyoti's book. To know more about these 7 texts, you can look at chapter 4 of the text. Okay, chapter 4. Chapter 3 provides the explanations of this, all exist by Sarvastivada school. How the school came to be, how it was established, and why it is upholding this idea of all exist. This I have already mentioned, why it is called Ashtagrantha, because it has 8 parts. These are just further information on 7 texts. Now, yeah, so you would find a presentation of 75 dharmas in the Sarvastivada Abhidharma, categorized in terms of rupa, 11 rupa, chitta, 1, chaitasika dharmas, 46. You'd find different classification of chaitasika dharmas in terms of mahabhumika, kushala mahabhumika dharmas, klesha mahabhumika dharmas, paritta klesha bhumika dharmas, aniyata dharmas. And then you have chitta viprayukta samskara dharmas, 14, and then asamskrita dharmas, 3. Okay, so primarily this is the standpoint they had. Okay, I think I can discuss this one. So these are some of their arguments on the idea of sarvastitva, existence of all. That is, dharmas exist in 3 periods of time: past, present, and future. And dharma refers to this 75 dharmas, right? So this is the first statement: 2 thoughts cannot be connascent. Okay, so there cannot be 2 thoughts being present at the same time. 2 moments of thought. Secondly, it says a thought or thought concomitant, that is chitta and chaitasika, cannot know itself. Okay, a thought cannot know itself. That is one of the ideas, and I think it is obvious, because when you talk about knowing or even being conscious of something, you have to have an object for that consciousness. So if you talk about 2 thought moment, 1 thought moment becoming the object of another thought moment. The observing thought and the observed thought, object of a thought, cannot be simultaneous, nor can the present thought know itself. Okay, so there is an example. For example, says when there is craving, if somebody says that I know that there arose craving in my mind, the thought that knows the craving thought suggests that these 2 thoughts are different. They cannot arise simultaneously in 1 thought moment. That is not possible. And present thought cannot know itself. Therefore, it suggests that thought observed must be either past or future. And therefore, past and future dharmas must be existent. Yeah, good question. Even the nirvana is a concept. Even the nirvana is a concept. So that is what we find in the discussion of Acharya Nagarjuna. Samsara is nirvana. Nirvana is samsara. They are relative. Yes. This is a good point actually, because it is on the basis of this that all these different understanding are, coming up. Sammuti, Satcha, and Paramatta Satcha. Conventional truth, ultimate truth. So conventionally, everything is real as we see them, as we experience them, but ultimately they are not real, right? But then how do you define ultimate? Who would define ultimate? Right? How do you understand ultimate? The term that you use, paramatta, is a constructed word. The presentation of dharmas as ultimate reals, are also ideas constructed. Whatever that is constructed, samskrita, that are not regarded as ultimate. Then what is ultimate? Is there anything that is called ultimate? Or we have to really get out of this concept of ultimate and not ultimate. So we find that in the text of Abhidharma, there is an effort made by the Abhidharma masters to explain the ultimate reality in terms of dharmas, right? And, with all these ideas that otherwise, what is the point of this life? What is the point of, leaving home, becoming Shramanera or taking Prabrajya? Because you want to get out of samsara, right? You have to follow a certain path, and you have to know that this is conventional truth and this is ultimate truth, and you take up a path, you proceed from one step to another. So you have to accept that there is past, present, and future. There are past lives. There is past me, present me, and future me, right? Until you become free from the samsara. That is the goal, right? But then again, when we look at the discussion of, the teaching of the Buddha in the work of Acharya Nagarjuna, he would say that all these classifications, all these explanations of, existence, non-existence, sammuti, paramatta, somebody being putujjana, somebody being Arya, becoming Buddha, all these are concepts. Somebody mentioned about sunyata is paramatta. Even the sunyata is also concept. Okay. Okay. Let's look at some of this description. I think it is very methodically, systematically presented in this few texts. I would be opening up this short document and I would go through these steps, and then I think it would be clear for all of us. Yeah.
Teacher, can you show this previous slide once again, please?
This one?
Yes. Because in the one that says Asamskrita dharmas, the 2 and 3 that says cessation. Okay. That are the ones that are most close to nirvana, but it's still previous steps, right?
Yeah. I think these two related to representing two forms of nirvana probably. Akasha is added here because in the Theravada tradition also you have two explanations of nirvana, right? One is
yes, I think these two. One is through thought, through thinking, and the other one is without, like as a result, not as a something active to do.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay, so now let's look at the arguments provided by Abhidharma masters of the Sarvastivada Abhidharma in support of the idea of Sarvatitva. Okay, from this document from Professor Dharma Jyoti. So this is from his text. This is from chapter 3. So he specifically cited these 3 texts. Okay. Anyone focusing on Sarvastivada Abhidharma can tell what this, symbols
Vijnana
mean?
Kaya Shastra.
Vijnana Kaya Shastra,
Kaya
and then
Shastra. Mahavivasha Shastra.
Mahavibhasha Shastra,
Abhidharma Koshavasya.
Abhidharma Koshavasya. Okay, so these 3 texts. Okay, let's look at the explanation of Sarvatitva in Vijnana Kaya Shastra first. So in the VKS Shah, the author establishes the thesis of tritemporal existence on the basis of 4 fundamental principles commonly and tacitly assumed by the Abhidharmikas, partly on the authority of the sutras and partly from among accepted Abhidharma tenets. So this is what I have just mentioned. 2 thoughts cannot be connascent, and a thought or thought concomitant cannot know itself. It is said in the sutra that a person can observe the craving in his mind, etc. When one is making the observation, the observing thought and the craving, the thought having the craving observed, cannot be simultaneous, nor can the present thought know itself. The craving observed then must be either past or future. Hence, past and future dharmas must be existent. So this is one of the argument. The second point, in terms of karma and vipaka, we talk about karma and vipaka. So there is cause and effect. Karma and its retribution, vipaka, cannot be simultaneous. So you do not perform action and then you experience result at the same moment. The fact that a karma which has become past can give rise to its retribution later proves the existence of the former as past dharma. For example, an existent in its past mode. So if you want to establish the relationship between karma and vipaka, you have to accept this idea of past, present, and future existence, tritemporal existence. Thirdly, the Buddha has taught that consciousness necessarily has an object, alambana. So without alambana, there is no consciousness. Since we can have consciousness of what is past and future, past and future dharmas must be existent. Right? If they are non-existent, you cannot have consciousness of past and future. Fourthly, one can be endowed with samanvagata, dharmas which do not arise presently. It is taught in the sutra that someone in Nirodha Samapatti, wherein no mental activity arises, is still endowed with mental qualities such as moderateness in wishes, alpechata, shamefulness, lajja, etc. Likewise, a trainee, saiksha, is still endowed with the 5 spiritual faculties, faith, vigor, etc., even when he has an enwrapped or defiled mind. Accordingly, those which are not present but can still be possessed must be existing as past or future dhammas. Is it understood? So this is explained in terms of endowment, samanvagata. So it is like now you have a compassionate mind, but it does not mean that after a few moments later on, you would get angry, right? Then the question is, how is it possible if it is not there previously? If the seed or whatever, the potency is not there, right? So here the example given is of a Nirodha Samapatti person. So when you talk about Nirodha Samapatti, cessation meditation, one is completely free from all kinds of mental activities, but still probably in the unconscious level, these qualities of alpechata, lajja, etc. are still present. Because if they are completely removed, after he get out of the meditation, they should not be present there. So that is from Vijnana Kaya Shastra, right? Yeah. Nirodha Samapatti is, I think it is the 9th one. So you have 4 Arupa Jhanas, 4 Rupa Jhanas, 4 Arupa Jhanas, and then the 9th one. What are the 4 Arupa Jhanas? Akasa Ananchayatana, Vijnana Ananchayatana,
Akinsenyayatana. Nivatanyanathanyayatana.
Nevasaya Nasayayatana. Yeah, so then you have Nirodha Samapatti, Sanya Vadaita Nirodha. Yeah, I think it is referring to the 9th one. Now, the arguments from Mahavibhasha Shastra. Most of the arguments are similar, but there are some differences as well. The arguments for the tritemporal existence of dharmas are put forth to refute those who are deluded with regard to the intrinsic nature of the 3 times, Advan, denying the past and the future, and holding that what exists in the present are the unconditioned dharmas. In a way, actually, if you reject the idea of past and present, you have to reject the idea of, if you reject the idea of the existence of past and future, you have to reject the idea of the existence of present as well, I think. The first argument employs this Sarvastivada notion of endowment, Samannavagama, a notion that suggests some doctrinal development. One is endowed with a dharma when one, having acquired it, continues to possess it. When a dharma has not been acquired and one continues in a state of not possessing it, there is the non-endowment of this dharma. So it could be good qualities, it could be even negative qualities. When they are present, they are acquired. When they are not present, it is not that they are non-existent, it is just that they are not acquired. For the Sarvastivada, this human experience presupposes the existence of past and future dharmas. The other arguments employ systematic logical disputation coupled with an appeal to scriptural authority. So how they have presented this idea? Firstly, they say, if past and future are non-existent, there would not be endowment and non-endowment of these dharmas. Just as there is no endowment and non-endowment of a second head, a third hand, etc. Very interesting example, which are non-existent, right? So suddenly you do not have a second head. You just have one single head. You have two hands, you cannot have three hands tomorrow, right? Since there are in fact the endowment and non-endowment, it is known that past and future are existent. Any question? Yeah, so when discussing about this tritemporal, the arguments for the establishment of tritemporal existence, you have to keep in mind why they are doing it. Okay, because they are very much connected to understanding the teaching of the Buddha properly and putting them into practice. Okay, understanding the reality as it is. How is it possible? What exactly happens? So that is what they have been trying to understand. Secondly, the person who denies the past and the future must say in which temporal period the fruit of a present retribution cause exists. Past, present, or future. So, fruit of a present retribution cause exists. So you perform a cause, perform a karma that is explained, that is understood as a cause. It must have a result, right? When does it produce result? In the past, present, or future? This is a question, especially if you are not accepting the existence of past, present, and future. If he says past, then the past exists. If he says future, then the future exists. If he says present, then it amounts to the proposition that a retribution cause and its fruit exist simultaneously, which contradicts scriptural statements. Right? I think this is very clear. If you say that the result of an action exists in the past, that means you are accepting past. If you say the result of an action exists in future, comes to be in future, you are accepting the idea of future. And if you are saying that at the present moment, actually, the result also takes place, then you are contradicting the sutra statements, scriptural statements that says that, two thoughts cannot be simultaneously present in the same moment. Now, this is from the perspective of retribution, that is result, vipaka. The same thing goes with the karma as well. If he says its fruit is not within the 3 periods of time, then he is proposing that there is no fruit, since a retribution fruit is not unconditioned. And if there is no fruit, then there would not be no cause either. So if you cannot really place a time period for this retribution to take place, you are saying that there is no result, right? That means there is no cause for this result as well. So in a way, I find that these Abhidharmikas, when trying to establish this idea of tritemporal existence in terms of the relationship between cause and effect, I find Nagarjuna's explanation of rejecting everything. Yeah.
Teacher?
Yep.
So this is a bit confusing because actually the time is just a construct, right? There is no past, present, future. It's just that this vipaka or karma is stored in the mind. It's not stored in time. It's not some time event that will come in the future. It's just in the mind, and everything is experienced in the now. We cannot even call it like the present. You know, the Buddha said we have to renounce all these three concepts. We have to distinguish between concept and reality. What you were saying earlier,
Yeah.
Samiti and Paramata, no?
So you say time is a concept.
Yeah, it's like just how the construct that we use to explain
Yeah.
for people
But-
who say don't believe in karma. But this
But-
karma is an imprint in our mind, not imprint on some timeline that exists somewhere else.
I know. So where does this concept exist?
In our mind,
And
Not
where is
anywhere
this
else.
mind?
not in this, it exists as a seed in the mind. Those seeds like the upakilesa that the Buddha talked about is in our mind, and it manifests right now, not in the future or the past or the present even. It's just that we have to see it outside of the
I know.
language construct.
Yes, that is the point, outside of the language construct. But even when you talk about the exist in consciousness, right now, even the word consciousness is a construct word. What do you mean by consciousness? And then what do you mean by right now?
Yeah, like the
So you are using language.
We already established that consciousness cannot arise without
I know.
the sankara or
I
the.
know.
So we
Yes.
established that, but we don't have to say right now for anything. We just have to say it's in our mind, and it comes to fruition when it's the time for it to come to fruition, and when it's the right condition are there. That's how it usually explained. It's the right
Yes.
condition are
So
there.
what I
And it-
mean is that anyway, we have to use this language and words, and then attached to this language and words, there are concepts and ideas and understanding, right? And when these Abhidharmikas have been discussing about time, of course, they are, I think, well aware of the fact that time is a concept, right? But they're trying to establish something here that is the causality, the sequence. There is a sequence, okay? One is not without the other. You cannot even talk about the present without talking about past and future, right? And when you talk about, how do you say, purification of mind, you cannot talk about the purification of mind without discussing about defilements of the mind.
Yes, we can talk about purification and defilements, but we don't have to. The Buddha said we should not talk about the past or future or even the present, the advanced stages of meditation. We should also remove that concept from our mind. But I think those people are trying to establish something intellectually, and it just doesn't make any sense.
I see. Okay.
This is my honest opinion. Sorry.
Okay.
By the way, who are those people? Sorry, I don't know.
Okay. Anyway, okay. I think it should be, I mean, more clear, I guess, as we, read further. Okay. Let's see what understanding you can acquire from our further discussions. Okay, because there are more, and then we can talk about your ideas of this
I want to say
consciousness and so on.
something.
Yes.
So, for example, that Sammy was talking about the time and space. So, can we say that like time is a succession of events? So, like what we are perceiving through our consciousness is like, I mean, is time and space, they are they independent of ourselves, or like they're dependent on how we perceive them through our consciousness? So is it like
Yeah,
that?
right. True. That is true. That is a general understanding of time. Yeah, that much is true.
So what would be the position of it's like which way? I think I'm confused.
I think, we have to, as I said, we have to look at it look at these explanations in terms of how, these people are discussing about this in relation to one's, practice and one's understanding of reality, how one can really progress in the path in that way. Otherwise, these masters are actually well aware of all these, things, time as a concept and so on. Because ultimately, if you talk about even, event or whatever, I mean, first of all, who is discussing? Why there is a need for this discussion? There is no one, right? No self, no one to be around in the samsara, no one to be liberated. What is the point of discussion? Isn't it? So if you are focusing on consciousness concept, you are accepting that there is something that is there. It is the consciousness, right? Pure, impure, I don't know, awakened consciousness. You are still saying that there is something that is there. Even that is a misunderstanding, misinterpretation. If you look at the explanation of the teaching in the sutta, you do not have to come to Abhidharma. You see? So when they are making use of these words and expressions, there's a particular purpose to it. So we have to try to look at it that way. It is not just a as a nominal existence. It is not just ultimately they are giving a kind of judgment that it should be in this way. Even when so this usage of past, present, and future, they are not talking about absolutely unchanging entity that is existing.
So if I
And this is very useful. Just now, for example, someone is saying that this sequence of events represent time. Yes, that is the thing. Sequence of events. You make a vow to leave home. You want to take up, this life of a monastic member. That is your vow. Why this thought came into your mind? Why do you renounce home life? Why do you follow a certain path of practice? And then slowly you progress until you achieve the state of freedom. So sequence of events representing time. There is past, present, and future. So here there is no talk about absolutely unchanging entity.
Sammy was saying that it's like, is it independent or of a consciousness, or dependent on a...
All the discussions that taking place here is conditioned reality, not independent. Dependent, conditioned, produced.
So each time is dependent on our consciousness to exist.
Sorry?
I mean, the time is like we are perceiving the succession of events. So is it based on our consciousness, or it exists independently? I mean, you said depends on something. So is it independent or dependent? I mean, it's like...
Time, of course, dependent. How you see it? Your time is different from my time. If it is independent, it should be the same for everyone, right?
Well, sir, for example, Albert Einstein, he said the theory of relativity, that
Yeah.
if I put my hand on a hot stove for 1 minute, it will seem like an hour.
Yes.
If I put my hand on something which is very soft, and then for 1 hour, it would be like 1 minute. So it's relativity. So do you agree with this, that it's like time is dependent on consciousness to exist? So that would be the case in the case.
Yes, that is what I'm saying. Not independent. It is all the time.
And what about space?
The phenomenal experience of a person, everything. Even when we try to understand ourselves, forget about the external reality. Our own experience. It is just how you experience it, how you see it, how you feel it, based on what conditions of your mind, your existence.
All right, so for example, when we even say that the time is independent, is it also not, we are saying that like time is moving in a certain direction, it's unique or it's sequence, but
I'm not saying time is independent.
what I mean is that the consciousness is like also inferring that it is all the same, but it's like subjectivity arising instead of objectivity.
I do not have a clear understanding of what is consciousness actually. I mean, what do you mean by consciousness?
So I mean, Sam is saying that it reality doesn't exist. So it might be like consciously, it might not. I mean, exist physically, or so confusing sometimes. But maybe it's like existing in the mind or whatever. It's like that. Sorry.
Sorry?
I mean, yeah.
Hmm? Time is simply how we try to understand the universe, but in reality, it doesn't exist. In reality, we don't exist as well. So it means we'll stop talking about it. That is true. So this whole discussion is about the phenomenal existence and phenomenal experience, not what is happening ontologically. That is the idea. Because it is not possible to know. And probably the only way would be, I don't know, to know oneself first. Because if we are not in a position to know ourselves first, how can we know things outside of us? Because whatever we experience, we see it in our own way. Okay.
The Madhyamika philosopher, Venerable Nagarjuna.
Yeah.
Nagarjuna was saying, I mean, it's like Chatuspoti. Like,
yes.
So he says this, that space, I mean, if he was criticizing this idea of God, that if God created something, then where did he put all these elements into it if there was no space? So it must be space, must be breathing, existing before that. That's why he put something in that. So it was a critique of God. So I mean, was Nagarjuna, I mean Nagarjuna, Madhyamika philosophy, would he agree? I mean, it's like, sorry, I'm not able to frame the question, but was space existing before?
No. In the Nagarjuna's teaching, you do not talk about exist or do not exist of anything.
It's like middle way, I know that.
Yeah, the middle way, but it does not mean that in between the two. It is going beyond these ideas of exist and non-exist. Even the sunyata, he says, the emptiness is having empty nature. Empty of emptiness. Right? So, what he was telling us is that you do not really grasp on any type of concept. And of course, that is not easy to achieve. Is not easy to understand. Oh, okay, now I think it is break time for break. So we have a break now, and then we continue after that. Okay, see you after the break. Okay, let's continue with the discussion. Okay, let us go through some of these pages, and then we have, I think, better understanding of this idea of tritemporal existence that these Sarvastivadins have been talking about. Okay, so in this passage, the discussion is with regard to retribution of a kamma. Okay, vipaka of a kamma. In the following paragraph, similar argument is made, similar presentation is made with regard to the cause. Okay, the same explanation is provided with regard to the cause. So likewise, if the retribution fruit exists in the present, then he must say in which temporal period that corresponding cause occurs. Past, present, or future. If he says past, then the past exists. If he says future, then the future exists. If he says present, then it amounts to the proposition that a retribution cause and its fruit exist simultaneously, which contradicts scriptural statements. If he says its cause is not within the 3 periods of time, then he's proposing that there is no cause, since a retribution cause is not unconditioned. And if there is no cause, then there would be no fruit either. If the past, so this is with regard to the cause. Now, it is made very, very clear with this word unconditioned. So there is a discussion of unconditioned, reality always here. So you have to keep that in mind. Now, here there is another argument. It says, if the past and the future were non-existent, then there would not be the facts of leaving home and receiving higher ordination in accordance with the stanza below. If one holds that the past does not exist, there would not be past Buddhas. If there were no past Buddhas, there would not be leaving home and receiving higher ordination. So as you can see, they are trying to make sense of this sequence. I mentioned it earlier also. You take up a vow, and then where does this vow exist? It is in your mind. It is a commitment that you made. Okay, it doesn't matter if somebody else knows about it or not. And according to that vow and commitment, you follow your path, right? So first of all, you take a vow, and then you take up the actions, and that is how you proceed. So there is a kind of a sequence, right? So those who are just focusing on the present moment, in some cases, probably they are missing out this sequence or links. So these masters, they're trying to emphasize on this aspect. Next argument, if the past and the future were non-existent, then it must be that Sangha members practice false speech while possessing proper knowledge in accordance with the stanza below. So this is with regard to when somebody becomes a Sangha member and talks about his living of a monastic life for different period of time. So it says, if a Sangha member holds that the past is non-existent and yet speaks of his ordination age, he would be increasing day by day both his proper knowledge and false speech. So once somebody becomes a Sangha member, day by day he continues to practice. So his monastic, living is extended, right, from 1 year to 2 year to 3 year, and then accordingly he gains his knowledge. But then if he doesn't relate, his becoming a monastic member and living a life of a monastic member in relation to past, present, and future. So according to this statement, it says that he's, speaking false. Now look at this explanation here. So it says the non-existence of the past and future implies that the present likewise does not exist, since the present is designated in relation to the past and future, right? So this is very, very clear. The 3 times not existing, the conditioned would not exist. The conditioned not existing, the unconditioned too would not exist, since the later is established in relation to the former. The conditioned and the unconditioned both not existing, then there would not be any dharma whatsoever, which entails that there is no liberation and nirvana, a serious false view. So this is from the Abhidharma point of view. This is considered as a false view. In fact, if you look at the explanation of Acharya Nagarjuna, you would find that that is how it should be. You have to go beyond this idea of conditioned, unconditioned, and everything. But as long as you are functioning in the conditioned world, you have to accept this sequence of past, present, and future, and then accordingly, kamma and vipaka, practice, and the result of your practice. So that is how you proceed. So that is what is emphasized in this passage. So again, you have other arguments from Abhidharma Kosha Bhashya. Now here, there are basically two arguments, but presented in terms of 4 points. So the first passage says, for as it has been said by the Buddha, O bhikshus, if past rupa did not exist, the learned noble disciple could not have become disgusted with regard to the past rupa. It is because past rupa exists that the learned noble disciple becomes disgusted with regard to the past rupa. If future rupa did not exist, the learned noble disciple could not have become free from delight with regard to the future rupa. It is because future rupa exists, that is why they can be free from the delight with regard to the future rupa. So this is a quotation taken from suttas. Next, it says, it has been said by the Buddha, conditioned by two, that is sense organ and object, there is the arising of consciousness. So you have sense organ and sense object, and then there is sense consciousness. This is again taken from sutta. Now this master provides his arguments. Consciousness arises when there is an object, not when there is no object. This is a fixed principle. If past and future dharmas were non-existent, there would be a consciousness having a non-existent object. Hence, in the absence of an object, consciousness itself would not exist. I think this is, here we can find a stronger and a different perspective of, the Abhidharma master talking about the existence of past, present, and future. If past dharmas were non-existent, how could there be in the future the fruit of pure or impure karma? For it is not the case that at the time of the arising of the fruit, a present retribution cause exists. So again, coming back to the same point, that cause and effect cannot exist together at the same mind moment. So this is all with regard to the idea of sarvatitva. There are different masters in different texts provided explanations with regard to the tritemporal existence, how it should be understood. And of course, there have been criticisms from different other schools as well. Basically, this is a discussion about the 75 dharmas, just that we have just seen. And these 75 dharmas, they are regarded as irreducible, entities when you analyze 5 aggregates. And each of these 75 dharmas having their own nature, swabhava, that distinguishes one from the other. But they don't really say that they are ultimately real, existent. Okay, so that we have to keep in mind. And what they are trying to tell us is the sequence, the causal connection, between these 3 phases of a dharma. Its past phase, present phase, and future phase. And of course, this we have to understand in terms of concept as well. Right? But then again, we have to consider it from the perspective of like, not concept alone, but there is a kind of a, how do you say, causal efficacy that is running there when you talk about, for example, the relationship between karma and effect. How does it continue to exist or function as a force until it gets ripened and retribution is given or experienced. So that is about the Sarvastivada standpoint of Dharma, especially the tritemporal existence of Dharma. As I said, you can look at some of the text composed by these Abhidharma masters, like Acharya Vasubandhu and so on. But you can also look at the text produced by modern scholars such as Professor Dhamma, Professor Charles Willeman, who have been working on this Abhidharma, Sarvastivada, Abhidharma thought and literature. Okay, now we will be looking at the Theravada Abhidharma explanation. But before that, I would like to mention this thing because we have a few more lectures, and then after that you have to make your class presentation. You have one final essay to submit, longer one, right? And then at the end of the semester, there will be final test, final examination. That is going to be home exam, I guess. So for the presentation, I had some discussions with some faculty members here, and then we decided that I think it would be better if you record your presentation beforehand and send to me. Then we can play them in the class one after the other, right? That would be, I think, good, because otherwise if you want to make live presentation in the class, during the class, sometimes because of internet problem and so many issues, it could be disrupted and it would take a lot of time. Okay, so what do you think of that?
I think, sir, it's not bad. It's a good idea, sir. Yeah, for online students, it's very difficult. That one presentations, sometimes internet low, sometimes connection loss. It's one good idea, sir. I agree with you.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Teacher,
yes.
hello. We are starting a presentation on November or December.
Presentation will be in November. Just
November.
right? Where is this? Or we did not write dates. So it should be, I think, in November.
Okay, teacher, thank you.
So November.
November, October.
You did not mark. You did not mark. Yeah, it is empty here.
I've got only one. Today, not mark.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so everyone has to make presentation. Not just the Mr. When is the last class? Yeah. 12 November, right? This is the last day of lecture. 12 November. Yeah, in November, in the first week of November.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, teacher.
Longer essay. For MA, longer essays for MA students. Yeah, so how long do you want to speak?
Sir, sir, hello.
Yes.
Sir, I already wrote. I wrote already 2,500 watt.
Okay, very good. Very good. So the time I was thinking for your presentation is 7 to 10 minutes. It's okay, right?
Okay,
Okay.
teacher.
Minimum 7, maximum 10. Is it okay?
And 3 papers, okay?
Sorry?
Then I will do presentation on non-member 3 papers. I am.
Yeah, everyone will be making presentation one after the other.
Okay, teacher.
When will be the end of this term? In November, you are going to have your final test. And the next term will start most probably in the middle of December, I guess. Is it mentioned there, Venerable, in your calendar? Hmm? Yeah, so December 8th, and the meeting is okay. Announcement of grade. December, yeah.
So nice.
Sometimes in the middle or end of December, the second semester will begin.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so that is decided now. You have to make a presentation for 7 to 10 minutes on a topic that you like to speak about. Okay.
Okay, teacher. So nice library, the behind to all the Buddhist philosophy books.
Hmm? Yeah. Okay, then we continue with our class. Okay, so we have been talking about this Sarvastivada Abhidharma. They are having this 7 text and the idea of Sarvatitva. Now, in the Theravada tradition, as you know, there are these 7 texts: Dhamma Sangani, Vibhanga, Dhatu Kata, Pugala Payanti, Katavattu Yamaka Patthana. So these are texts belonging to Abhidharma Pitaka. You can look at them. The translations of all these texts are available now in English. You can also look at some of these modern texts, produced by different scholars. This one is a comprehensive manual of Abhidharma. This is Abhidhamma Sangaha. This was originally translated by Narada Thera, right? And later on, Bhikkhu Bodhi edited it and published it later. So this was the text I was talking about. This text is also very, very important. Guide through the Abhidhamma Pitaka by Jnana Tiloka Mahathera. Now in this book, you would find summary presentation of all the 7 texts. So if you find it difficult to go through the text, Okay. You can look at this, text and have an understanding of this subject matter that are discussed in the 7 Abhidhamma books. And this one, the Theravada Abhidhamma, Inquiry into the Nature of Conditioned Reality by Professor Y. Karunadasa. In this text, you would find the Abhidhamma topics, for example, the theory of Dhamma, Dhamma Theory, or real existence, and the concept of Chitta, or even Chetasika, Rupa Dhammas, Vibhanga Chitta, all these concepts have been discussed philosophically. Okay. So for a systematic understanding of all these topics, you can look at this text, the Theravada Abhidhamma by Professor Karunadasa. So these are some modern texts. Now, I think you are well aware that the topics of discussion in Abhidharma are, aggregates, ayatanas, dhatus, right? And you'd find they are presented in terms of Sankata and Asankata. So there is just one Asankata, that is Nibbana. All the others are Sankata, conditioned reality. So this you have to keep in mind, conditioned reality. Okay. So ultimate analysis of conditioned reality. So it doesn't say ultimately real, truth. There is only one unconditioned reality, that is Nibbana. And this is according to the Theravada tradition. And now if you want to discuss about Nibbana, so as it is presented in different suttas, what is Nibbana is going beyond samsara.
Sir, Nibbana is a Pali language, but someone they call Nirvana. Why the Nirvana? Which come from Nirvana?
In Sanskrit, they use the term Nirvana. In Pali, Nibbana. Yes. Yeah. So you have psychoethical classification of the Dhammas as Kusala and Akusala, and Abhyakata, Vipaka, Abhyakata, Kiriya. 3 classification. So as Vipaka and Kiriya, Abhyakata is divided into 2. Discussion of Chitta, Chetasika, and Rupa Dhammas in terms of Kama Vachara, Rupa Vachara, Arupa Vachara, and Paramatta Dhammas. Among other topics, you have Satcha or path factors, Bojjhanga, Appamana, Indriya, Bala, Iddhipada, Satipatthana, Sammapadhana. So some of these topics are very much connected to spiritual practice. Okay, not just analysis of dharmas, but the practices associated with the attainment of different stages and one's understanding of reality as it is. The first text is Dhamma Sangani. You have classification of Chitta in the first chapter, and then presentation of Rupa, and then a summary, and then an Attakata, associated with this previous explanations. In the Vibhanga, you would find discussions of Khanda, Ayatana, Dhatu, Satcha, Indriya, and so on, Magga, Jhana. Okay. So these are the topics that are discussed in Vibhanga. And in the Dhatu Kata, the discussion is presented in terms of dharmas being associated and dissociated. So this is one of the texts I think that is said to be used to test one's understanding of reality or one's spiritual progress. Puggala Panyati basically discusses about individual types. Okay, so there is a discussion with regard to this text that it doesn't really fit to be called an Abhidhamma text in the strict sense of the term, because a presentation of different types of Puggalas can be found even in Anguttara Nikaya, right? So in this text you have Puggala or individual can be understood as one type, two types, three types, having one qualities, two qualities, three qualities, and so on. Katavattu is the text that was composed by Mugaliputta Tisatera. So this present views belonging to orthodox, that is traditional view, and views of other schools that are rejected by the Vibhajyavadins. Yamaka has got this 10 parts, and it is called Yamaka because the presentation is made in terms of pairs. And then Patthana is the 7th book, where you have a discussion of 24 Pachayas, right? Hetu Pachaya, Ramana Pachaya, and so on. Okay, now we'll be discussing about the idea of Dhamma. So Dhamma in Abhidhamma is understood to be the basic factors of phenomenal existence, and that which transcends phenomenal existence, that is Nibbana. So apart from Nibbana, the others are basic factors of phenomenal existence. Principal theory, all the phenomena of empirical existence are made up of a number of elementary constituents. The ultimate realities behind manifest phenomena. Okay, so when we talk about momentary existence, each moment, shana, each unit represents coming together of several dharmas. It arose from the need to make sense out of experiences in meditation, and was designed as a guide for meditative contemplation and insight. The Buddha had taught that to perceive the world correctly is to see not self-entities and substances, but bare phenomena arising and perishing in accordance with their conditions. So Abhidharma here, when talking about Dharma, it is referring to this bare phenomena arising and perishing. So these bare phenomena, they are not unchanging entities. They are arising constantly and perishing in accordance with their conditions. The Abhidhamma specialist specified exactly what these bare phenomena are and how they interact with other bare phenomena to make up our common sense picture of the world. So in the Theravada Abhidhamma, you have 4 main categories of Dhamma. There is 89 types of chittas, but chitta is presented as just one, and it is based on kusala, akusala, lobha, dvesa, moha, and so on. All this associated with all these cetasikas, it becomes 89, right? Chittas in the kama vachara world, chittas of the rupa vachara world, chittas of the arupa vachara world, and chittas of the paramatta, the state of being. 52 cetasikas. Cetasikas means mental factors or mental concomitants. They always arise with chitta. They do not have their origination independent of chitta. This computer is also giving some trouble. Okay. And 28 rupas. These rupas are understood to be mainly two types, primary rupa and secondary rupa, right? Mahabhuta and Upadaya rupa. And then one Nibbana. So this is in chart. Chittas, 89 types of chittas. Chitta of Putujanas, Lokiya, mundane, until here, until Kama Vachara, Rupa Vachara, and Arupa Vachara. Paramatta chittas are regarded as Lokuttara, supramundane. So these are mental factors. 52 mental factors. They are also classified differently. Universals, occasionals. Universals are the cetasikas that are present most of the time. Occasionals, they occur time to time, depending on condition. So this belong to ethically variable factors. In the category of unwholesome factors, you have universals and occasionals again. And these are called beautiful cetasika, sobana cetasika. And again, there are two categories, universals and occasionals. Rupa, these are the rupas, 28 rupas. So these four are only Mahabhuta, and the others are secondary rupas. Okay, now this is from the book by Professor Karunadasa. Okay, so you can look at his text for better understanding of Theravada, Abhidharma. So what he says here is, if dhammas are taken to exist and function in three periods of time, past, present, and future, then it amounts to radical pluralism. Again, here there is a talk about this concept of tritemporal existence and how it can result in radical pluralism. But it is not the case in the Theravada Abhidhamma, and it is for the simple reason that the whole edifice of its Dhamma theory is based not only on analysis, but also on synthesis. So he approaches this discussion of Dhamma from these two perspectives, analysis and synthesis. One is not without the other. So they are just two modes of explanation, two modes of understanding the same thing, two approaches. It means that the dhammas are not fractions of a whole indicating an absolute unity, nor are they a concatenation of discrete entities. They are a multiplicity of interconnected but distinguishable coordinate factors. They are not reducible to, nor do they emerge from, a single reality, which is the fundamental postulate of monistic metaphysics. If they are to be interpreted as phenomena, this should be done with the proviso that they are phenomena with no corresponding noumena. So again, the discussion here is of conditioned reality. For they are not manifestations of some mysterious metaphysical substratum, but processes taking place due to the interplay of a multitude of conditions. So what he's telling us here is that when you talk about the dharmas functioning together, you cannot really separate them from each other. Okay. So these dharmas come together to make sense of our, experience, common sense experience. But the dharmas that come together can be understood to have, uniqueness. Each factor in a unit having uniqueness in it. So this is a mental dissection. Okay. So you can separate mentally, just for the sake of having an understanding that, there is no absolute entity that is existing. That is the purpose of analysis. And the purpose of synthesis is to see how it appears, how it functions. You can now look at this document. Now, this is how Professor Karnadasa presented. Yeah, so he's talking about this analysis and synthesis. Now, analysis shows that what we take to be one is really many. What appears to be a unity is only a union of several factors. On the other hand, synthesis shows that the factors into which a thing is analyzed are not discrete entities existing in themselves, but interconnected and dependent modes in a complex web of relationships, so that none of them could be elevated to the level of a substance or discrete self-entity. So the focus is to have a clear understanding of non-self, right? Thus, both analysis and synthesis combine to demonstrate that what is analyzed and the factors into which it is analyzed are equally non-substantial. It is only for purposes of definition and description that things are artificially dissected and presented as discrete entities. The truth of the matter is that the phenomenal world of experience exhibits a vast network of relational categories where nothing can exist in splendid isolation. Yes. So it means that the dharmas are not fractions of a whole indicating an absolute entity, nor are they a concatenation of discrete entities. This we have read already. They are a multiplicity of interconnected and distinguishable coordinate factors. They are not reducible to, nor do they emerge from a single reality, which is the fundamental postulate of monistic metaphysics. If they are to be interpreted as phenomena, they should be done with the proviso that they are phenomena with no corresponding noumena. For they are not manifestations of some mysterious metaphysical substratum, but processes taking place due to the interplay of a multitude of conditions. The philosophy of Abhidharma thus accords with the middle doctrine of early Buddhism. This doctrine avoids both the eternalist view of existence, which maintains that everything exists absolutely, that is Sabbangati, and the opposite nihilistic view, which maintains that absolutely nothing exists, Sabbamnati. Okay, so even when you are talking about everything is empty or emptiness, that itself is just a concept, right? To explain the reality as it is. It doesn't just say that, nothing exists, everything is empty. It doesn't just say that. It also avoids, on the one hand, the monistic view that everything is reducible to a common ground, some sort of self-substance, sabam ekattam, and on the other, the opposite pluralistic view that the whole of existence is resolvable into a concatenation of discrete entities, sabbam pututtam. Transcending these two pairs of binary extremes, the middle doctrine explains that phenomena arise in dependence on other phenomena without a self-subsisting nomenon, which serves as the ground of their being. I think this is clear. Any questions so far? Phenomena arising in dependence on other phenomena without a self-subsisting nomenon, which serves as the ground of their being. So therefore, one of the significant idea that you can find in the Theravada tradition is that in the early Buddhist text, when talking about existence, non-existence, self, non-self, it says it should be understood in the sense of neither this nor that. You cannot really identify if it is this or that. And in the exposition of Nagarjuna, you'd find that he goes even one step further, right? In the Chatushkoti. The interconnection and interdependence of these dharmas are not explained on the basis of the dichotomy between substance and quality, or the distinction between the support and the supported. Adhara adeya bhava. A given dhamma does not inhere in another as its quality, nor does it serve another as its substance. So there is no distinction between substance and quality. So in other words, substance itself is quality, quality itself is substance. You do not distinguish between the two. So red is redness, right? It is not that red is possessing redness. The so-called substance is only a figment of our imagination. The distinction between substance and quality is denied because such a distinction leaves the door open for the intrusion of the theory of a substantial self, Attavada, with all that it entails. It is with reference to conditions that the interconnection of the Dhammas should be understood. The conditions are not different from the Dhammas. The Dhammas themselves constitute the conditions. Okay, so when you say that in a certain condition, a certain Dhammas function in a certain way, Dhammas themselves are conditioned. Conditions are Dharmas. As it is said, here is found neither a self nor a non-self. It is the Dharmas that generate Dhammas. How each Dhamma becomes a condition for the arising of another is explained on the basis of the system of conditioned genesis, Pachayakaranaya. So this you can find in Patthana, 24 modes of conditioned genesis. This system, which consists of 24 conditions, aims at demonstrating the interdependence and dependent origination of all Dhammas in respect of both their temporal sequence and their spatial concomitance. I wonder if there has been any study done on this text, Patthana and Nagarjuna's text. I'm not sure if there has been done any comparative study between these two set of literature. It would be, I think, interesting. Okay, now this section we may, avoid the Dhamma theory and the concept of person. You can look at the description in the book, actually. Let's talk a little bit about this Dhamma theory and the controversy on tritemporal existence, because that is our focus today. This doctrinal controversy, the Dhamma theory gave rise to was whether the Dhammas exist in the three divisions of time. If the Dhammas are generally accepted exist only in the present, how could one satisfactorily explain Buddhist teachings that involve both past and future phenomena? The doctrine of karma, for instance, says that the past karma can have its effect either in the present or in the future. The phenomena of memory involves remembering of thoughts and images which have already ceased to exist. It is said that two or more consciousnesses cannot exist at one and the same time. So this is the Sarvastivadin viewpoint that is being summarized here. It follows then that when we examine our own thought, it is really our past consciousness that becomes the object of our present consciousness. The same consciousness cannot examine itself, just as a fingertip that can touch many a thing cannot touch itself. It is said that one who has developed the faculty of retrospective cognition, Ubbenivasano can recall one's past births. Another case in point is the theory of cognition. An instance of cognition requires a series of thought moments to culminate in full cognition. Now here, there is a discussion of thought process, how a thought process takes place. So in the Theravada Abhidharma, there is a discussion of bhavanga chitta, right? 17 mind moments. Accordingly, if both mind and matter are of equal duration, it only follows that the object of perception is always inferred and not directly perceived. So the moment of mind and the moment of matter, if both the moments are same, the mind moment cannot really perceive directly the matter moment because they are arising and ceasing at the same time. So it says that the mind moment can just infer. So there is no direct perception. For when the cognitive process culminates in full cognition, the original sense datum which has impinged on the sense organ has already ceased to exist. Yeah, so that is why. In view of this and other Buddhist doctrines, which involve both past and future phenomena, it came to be speculated whether the past and future Dhammas too do really exist in some kind of manner. Now, this issue led to another doctrinal controversy and resulted in the emergence of a new school called Sarvastivadins. What separated them from the Theravadins was their theory that dharmas exist in all three divisions of time. The theory is based on a distinction made between the actual being of the dharmas as phenomena and their ideal being as noumena. It assumes that the substance of dharmas persist in all the three divisions of time. It is their manifestation as phenomena that is impermanent and subject to change. A dharma actualizes only in the present moment, but its essence continues to persist. This development comes into focus with the use of swabhava, own nature, as another expression of dharma. But as the Katavatta shows, the Sarvastivada theory amounts to having existed in the future, it exists in the present, and having existed in the present, it exists in the past. Hutva hoti, hutva hoti. The transition is from future existence to present existence, and from present existence to past existence. The Theravada position amounts to having not been, they come into being. After having been, they cease to be. Ahutva sambonti, hutva pativenti.
Here the transition.
Here the transition, if it could be called so, is from non-existence to existence and from existence to non-existence. Now there is a beautiful example provided here. of, sorry, I have mentioned it here. Here. As the Pali commentators elaborate on this theme, when a Dhamma arises in the present moment, it is not the case that its future own being becomes manifest in the present. When it ceases to be, it is not the case that its own nature continues to persist in the past. There is no store, sannidhi, from which they come, and there is no receptacle, sannichaya, to which they go. Now there is an example here given here. When a violin is played, so runs the illustration, the sound that arises does not come from a pre-existing store, and when it disappears, it does not go to any of the directions or sub-directions to be deposited. It is because of the violin, the bowstring, and the appropriate effort on the part of the player that the sound arises without having first existed, and when it disappears without a residue. So this was the standpoint of the Theravadins. Okay, so when talking about the sound of a violin, when they are saying that ahutva ahoti, hutva pativanti, so that is the theory. Having not been, they come into being. After having been, they cease to be. The sound of a violin is made of violin, bowstring, and appropriate effort, right? The sound was not previously existing in the violin, bowstring, or in the effort, okay? And after having been, the sound disappears without leaving any residue. In the case of Dhammas, one cannot speak of an arrival, agamana, or a departure, nigamana, because they have no existence either before their appearance or after their disappearance. If they appear, it is not that they come from somewhere, na kutochi agachanti. If they disappear, it is not that they go anywhere, na kuhincha gachanti. With no pre-existing pubbanta and post-existence aparanta, they have their existence only in the present, and that too in dependence on conditions. If it is necessary to speak of the past and the future existence of the dharmas, then it is a dhamma's nascent and cessant phases, arising and ceasing aspects that must be so considered. For a dhamma does not exist before its genesis and after its cessation. So there is, you cannot even talk about the present, there is just arising and ceasing.
In Abhidharma.
And Abhidharma manual adds that if anything can be predicated of the past and the future dhammas, it is none other than their absolute non-existence. You talk about the past and present, past and future of dhammas, you have to understand it in terms of their absolute non-existence, sabbena sabbang natti. For in the case of past and future dhammas, one cannot speak even of an inkling of existence, vijjamana thalesa. Each temporal division is devoid, sunya, of the other two and distinct, vivitta, from one another. So the idea is that for the Theravada, no Dhamma can become different from what it is. Nacha swabhava anyata hoti. So it is not that one changes to another. What really takes place is not bhava anyata, it's not change, it's not alteration of the Dhamma, but bhava vigamana, that is displacement of the Dhamma. In the case of Dhamma, a change of aspect amounts to its complete disappearance. So this is function. So they are not even talking about the existence of Dhamma in the present moment, while rejecting the existence of Dhamma in the past and future. Okay, this much for today. Is there any question or remark? For, as I said, for further understanding on Theravada Abhidharma and Sarvastivada Abhidharma, you can look at the text that I have mentioned earlier. Two of these modern texts, they provide you clear understanding of their theories. The Sarvastivada Abhidharma by Professor Dhamma and the Theravada Abhidharma by Professor Karnadasa. Yeah, I think I have sent you the names of this text, right? No? Yeah, so you can look at the original text as well. For example, the 7 Abhidhamma text belonging to Sarvastivada tradition, 7 Abhidhamma text belonging to Theravada tradition as well. But I think you can begin with these 2 texts first. Okay, then, if there is no other question or remark, we can end our class here today. Thank you for joining.
Teacher.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
Okay.